Colleagues, good afternoon and welcome to our inaugural Kusol Alumni Mentorship Series 2024 edition. I'm very pleased to note the attendances that are coming in. Today we are going to have a discussion on new frontiers in the legal profession, and our panelists are going to be Igati and Dr. Keen Mobegi, both of whom are alumni. Our host is going to be Johnston Daniel Jr., who's equally an alumni in our inaugural class. So I'm happy to invite in all of you, and I hope that we're going to have a fruitful discussion. Remember that this webinar has been brought to you by the Kusol Alumni Association, which I believe most of you are members. So I just would like to invite the moderator host for the session, Mr. Johnston Daniel Jr., to proceed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Allow me to call you Mr. Chairman because you were chairman even of our inaugural class. My name is Johnston Daniel Jr. Graduated 2014, but I was in the inaugural class. And it is a glorious thing to see that our student association and the Alumni Association are working together towards bringing continued growth in our profession and continued relationship between various generations of legal professionals. It is a mighty thing to be able to exchange at this level. The people who will be speaking today are individuals, especially for those who are still in the association right now, in KUSA right now. These are people who sat in the same places that you are sitting, who had opportunity to debate in the same, or rather to moot in the same moot court that you are mooting right now. And they have gone ahead to establish themselves in various fields within our legal profession. And we are praying that you will be attentive and will enjoy and engage, participate in this particular discussion. Allow me, the code was always ladies first, even when we were in school. So Daktari, you will allow me to begin by introducing Diana Ngache. She is a lovely lady who is currently leading legal compliance and governance. That is her area of specialty. She is presently an advocate of a high court. She's a certified company secretary, a member of the Institute of Certified Secretaries, a member of the Chartered Institute of Securities and Investment of the UK, that is SICA UK. Her legal career extends across various fields, that's financial law, capital markets, fintech, regional tech, ESG, data protection and privacy, financial crime prevention, and corporate governance. She is currently the regional head of compliance for Australia, Asia Pacific, UAE, Middle East, LATAM, and the Bahamas regions at the Pepperstone Group Limited, a global financial services company operating across Australia, Asia, Africa, Europe, and the Middle East. She holds a Master's of Science degree in Finance and Financial Law and from the University of London, and a bachelor's degree from our very own Kenyatta University. And you will be hearing her voice in just a moment. Dina, are you here?
Yes.
Do you want to say hello?
Hi, everyone. Good evening from this side of the world. It's 10:38 p.m.
Good Lord. Which side of the world are you calling in from?
Australia.
Australia. Thank you very much for joining us. Afford me an opportunity to introduce our other guests, and then we will begin the conversation in earnest. Our second guest is Daktari. He is and as you know, Daktari means he's a PhD holder. I think that is uncommon in our profession, but nonetheless, Dr. Tom Keen Mobegi, forgive me, is a legal scholar, consultant, and practitioner, currently working at the World Bank. He studied at, he's a visiting scholar at the Environmental Law Institute at Washington, D.C. Between 2014 and 2018, he was a lawyer at the UNEP, where he primarily worked on institutional government affairs and multilateral environmental agreements and treaties. He is of the class of 2014. He has acquired an LLM and a PhD in international law from the University of Liverpool, where he has also taught and developed professional interest in European Union law and institution. He is also an advocate of the High Court of Kenya and a member of the Law Society of Kenya in good standing, the American Society of International Law, and the Global Network for Human Rights and the Environment. Daktari, are you there?
We change this. Oh, good morning. From this side of the world as well. My name is Ken, as everybody said, and a pleasure to be here.
Daktari, where are you calling in from?
Washington, D.C.
Washington, D.C. Oh, today is a glorious day to have people abroad. Now, the topic that we have before us today for discussion is really a question of looking into where we are in the law and what are the new nascent areas in the law that perhaps we need to focus on, we need to look into, and where our profession, or at least we could lend ourselves to the development of our profession. And we are therefore looking at the new frontiers that we need to engage in. Now, the format of this particular discussion is going to be, we will afford an opportunity for each one of our guests to give a general address. And then immediately after we have a general address, we will afford ourselves a question and answer period. We will do it on the panel, and then we will proceed to have each and every member of all the attendees to have an opportunity to ask a question. Now, again, if you will allow Daktari, allow me to afford us the protocol to allow the ladies to go first. So tafadhali, Diana, if you could please proceed.
Right. So maybe just to give a bit of a background, I had the opportunity at the point of actually just right after leaving Kenya School of Law, after the exams, actually, I had the opportunity to join Capital Markets Authority as a legal assistant. And at the time, of course, we were sort of limited in terms of what we knew as the proper, the right way to go on from law school, from KU to Kenya Law School to probably practicing in a law firm, getting admitted to the bar, and then maybe just establishing your law firm and maybe practicing law in a law firm for, I don't know, for the rest of your life or something. But for me, I somewhat had already chosen from an earlier period or an earlier time with him, in law school, that I never really wanted to practice in a law firm, because my goals was to always become a company secretary. And what I aimed at was ensuring that by the time I was done with KU, I was done with my CPSs, right? So then interestingly, this opportunity comes in at the point of just right after law school. And I stayed at CMA for 2 years. And being at CMA for 2 years is what really opened up my whole perspective of how do I approach the law? How do I practice the law? Is practice of law really just in litigation, in conveyancing, in a law firm? Yes, we knew of in-house counsel, but how well did we understand on what in-house counsels do, or is it that conversation of, yeah, in-house counsels only sip tea and give instructions to external counsels? So having the opportunity to work with a regulator now opened up a whole field of investment law, financial law, and at the time, also, the CMA took the step to develop new regulations around online forex trading. I'm sure at this point, it's been 6 years since we implemented the regulation. So I'm sure most of you know of either you've heard of online forex trading or know of the regulations around forex trading. And being that I've always been one who loves tech, and anything techie and anything that's trying to build the younger generation, I really just pounced on the opportunity to learn and was at the forefront, even in my position, to ensure that I also, in my own little way, through research, through engaging a couple of people within the market, in developing the regulations. And well, everything pays forward, because at the time of implementation of the regulations, which was in 2017, the first online forex broker was regulated by the CMA, and they poached me to join them as a compliance manager. And at the time, for me, I only knew compliance as you reporting to the regulator on, have we filed the financial statements for last month, or for the last quarter, or for the last half financial year, or for the last year? Do we have the proper CEO does the CEO have the proper qualifications? Just the basic things. And the key question I kept asking myself is, I'm a lawyer. I want to move over to this other side to join them as primarily compliance, because again, it's a small company. The legal work wouldn't be as much as you will want it to be, especially because new companies, unfortunately, especially in the tech sector, mostly tend to ignore the legal aspect of the business and focus more on the business, the money-making side of the business. So moving over to this other side, again, the benefit of it is that I had been exposed to the regulator, and now I was exposed to a whole set of new regulations. I felt the world was for me to conquer in terms of getting an opportunity to work not just with the first regulated online forex broker within this market segment, but also having an opportunity to work with a multinational at the at the early stages of my career. And I can tell you, when I got into regulatory compliance, again, at the time I had already started doing my master's degree in finance and financial law. And it's actually just also expanded my thinking and my appreciation of international and global financial markets, both from a financial perspective as well as from a legal perspective. And what was the biggest thing that I learned? That sometimes we limit ourselves as to what we want to practice by saying, I can only practice, in fact, I remember at some point, someone telling me the only true test of a lawyer is practicing in a court of law. But I was able to establish, I love compliance. And by compliance, we're talking of regulatory compliance, we're talking of financial crime compliance. And being that those have been my areas of practice now for the last 7 years. And even in that capacity, it's actual practice of law, because at the end of the day, in compliance, you interpret the regulatory provisions and the legal provisions under the law and as prescribed by regulators, in this case, financial services regulators, and then see how you're able to use the law to enable business continuity. So as a lawyer within my field and within the sector that I'm operating in, I have grown to become more of a business partner as just opposed to being a lawyer. And in that growth of becoming a business partner, I've been exposed to more opportunities, and hence the title that we're having today of New Frontiers. And these areas have been in not just financial compliance or regulatory compliance, but looking at emerging issues such as artificial intelligence, data protection, ESG, which is environmental, social, and governance issues. How are these issues affecting the financial services space? And how do we as lawyers contribute to business continuity through contribution to these key issues that are happening in and outside of the business? So that for me has been my approach of I use the law as a tool to help the businesses that I have worked with directly as an employee, even and externally as a consultant, come up with or develop internal and external laws, internal and external governance procedures that help the businesses grow. So that for me has been my focus, that the same way you have a client and you will want to, go to litigation and help the client win their case. For me, I help businesses win internally by creating sustainable business processes that ensure longevity of the business, not just, and also sort of forming a cushion, because it's a risk mitigation measures we're putting in place for them to be able to even navigate the ever-changing legal and regulatory landscape. So Johnson, that I really just wanted to give an overview, because I know if I went back 10 years from where we are today, I wouldn't understand what compliance really means, right? Because we all know in-house, you're either an in-house lawyer. But when I tell people who are new to compliance, I'm not, in my previous role, I actually served as the general counsel and the chief compliance officer. But in this role, I'm serving as the regional head of compliance, which means there's a whole other department dealing with legal matters. So getting to understand what exactly compliance is and how you can actually leverage on such opportunities, even as a lawyer, and using your legal skills and your legal knowledge, for me is what I would really want to drive in this conversation today.
Thank you very much. I think that's a beautiful way to put it, especially to start with the fact that you had quite a bit of clarity to begin with, knowing that perhaps the courtroom is not your area of interest. And I don't know how many people, maybe by a show of hands on the platform, how many people are really, really scared of going to court? And it's not necessarily scared, it's perhaps court is not your cup of tea. It is a wonderful thing to hear that indeed you can chart an entire career path outside of the law. Now, just give us a snippet of some of the things that are critical, especially let me give an example. When we were in school, there was no such thing as ESG. There was no such thing as online trading had not even landed on these shores. If at all, it was still in stages of development. Kind of give us an idea of what the field looks like right now and what the evolution of that field has been since the time you were in school, especially because when you were in school, there is nothing of these things that you could have learned. Yes.
Great. So please mute yourselves. Okay. Thank you. So I want us to look at opportunities from emerging, from a financial perspective, from emerging markets and emerging technologies and emerging trends, right? So let's say in 2010, online Forex was still there. In fact, online Forex trading is one of the oldest financial markets that we have. I mean, we have even one of the companies that is in Kenya now is as old as 30 years old from a global. The parent company is actually as old as 30 years old. In fact, more, because it's a 1989 formed company. So that shows you how old the company, how old this space of online Forex is. But for me, the opportunity was not just in online Forex. The opportunity was being in fintech, which is finance and technology. I've always loved finance. I've always loved economics. And though I didn't really actually go and study economics, the whole concept of understanding how everything just works from an economics perspective, from a finance perspective, really ignites me. And when I joined the CMA and realized, oh, we actually can contribute as lawyers, not just by, again, going to court, but being key in policy development, being key in policy implementation, and being key in policy monitoring and constant change and review of the policy. That's where I got a keen interest on the compliance side of things without knowing that I was actually getting interest in the compliance side of things. So when I moved over to this other side, I realized finance and technology, which now is fintech, is really changing how things work. We knew of Safaricom, but until I joined my first fintech, that I got to understand how big of a deal Safaricom is from a changing lives perspective. Because when you think about it, I am in Australia, but I'm able to send my mom money, right? So that can show you how fintech has evolutionized how people think and how people do things and how people perceive things, right? So being in that fintech space for me is what gave me a whole different perspective. Then once I got into the fintech space, again, I constantly want to learn new things. I now started digging, okay, this thing called fintech, what are the things that I need to learn? Okay, there's the regulation aspect of it. So we have the Kenya regulations, which are new. I had interacted with the UK FCA regulations. I had interacted with the EU ESMA regulations. And now I had the opportunity to interact even with Dubai at the time. And soon after, when I moved over to my second company, I had the opportunity to interact even with the CISEC, which is the Cyprus, and other jurisdictions regulations, right? So again, the ability to see that this is the thing that is interesting me, which for me was finance and tech.
Oh.
And from a finance and tech perspective, what are the subset of things that interested me is how do regulations shape from a consumer perspective, a protection perspective, how are the regulations shaped or designed to protect the consumers, being that this is a very complicated product. And again, being that even this product in a Kenya perspective, it's more of, here are the regulations, but we have to continually improve and refine on the regulations so that one day they are 100% fit for purpose. Then within that fintech space, what are other emerging issues? For me, I identified the things that made me happy is I really loved governance. And when you think of governance, think of board governance, but also think of developing policies and procedures. And when you talk of developing policies and procedures, we are talking of if I am building a compliance manual or a compliance policy for an organization like Safaricom, the thing is I have to meet all the key business stakeholders. And in meeting all these key business stakeholders, you get to learn more about the business. So again, it goes back to my earlier statement where you're using your understanding of the law, not to tell people what the law is, but telling people this is the law and this is how we implement the law to ensure that we're in compliance with the regulations and at the same time we are enabling business continuity. Then I also identified I really like this, I really like the data protection issues, right? And then also I'm intrigued by AI and what AI is doing and how does AI affect the issues on data protection. Again, I'm still within the fintech sector. I have not gone out into other sectors. I'm still within that sector. I'm just trying to show that even in the sector that you're in, you are able to identify key issues within that sector that you can specialize in as a legal practitioner. The other area that I was able to really get into was financial crime. And when you talk of financial crime, we're talking of money laundering, fraud, and terrorism financing, right? Again, what are the emerging issues about AML, CFT? And again, when you look at even AML and CFT, there's an aspect of how are people even using AI to use it as a channel of expanding their scope of money laundering and terrorism financing. So when you look at all those areas, largely I will categorize them as compliance. I am still practicing law because primarily all those are issues governed by law, but I've been able to identify them as areas that I will want to specialize in, be so good at, and help my end client, which is organization within the tech industry. So that has been my approach, Johnston, and I hope it's answered your question. I get really passionate when I talk about these things. So
it oozes.
yeah.
The passion clearly oozes out. And it's a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful thing. I think you may not have been in court and proved your what you call them, your chops in court, but you have proved what it means to be a learned person. Because a learned person is not the individual who practices that which they learned in school, but is a person who is able to engage with an environment that is entirely new, be able to define what that space ought to look like, and then therefore continue to produce solutions for people within that space. I think one of the things that perhaps we didn't quite get in school was the understanding that the law is a handmaiden to society. So we work in support of society. And I think what you have stated demonstrates the kind of mental walkthrough that one has to go through in understanding their space, in engaging with a completely new space, and then affecting that space, creating room for themselves to affect that space. Now, if you will allow me, Diana, I want to segue to Dr.
Yes.
Tom Keen. You're also in a completely different line. Dr. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you very much. You're also in a completely different line. I don't know whether you've had opportunity to walk the aisle of the court here in Nairobi, even though you're an advocate. You're also in a completely different line. You've been in that space for quite some time. You've taken some time to educate yourself also. I would like to have you give us your inaugural speech, as it were, address, and then after that we'll engage on a few questions, and then we'll open it to the panel. So please, Dr. proceed.
Thank you, Johnston, and good morning, everyone, from wherever you're joining us. How do I pick up from where Diana left? Because I feel like she's covered the entire world and I'm just living in it. Anyway, I joined KU in 2010, and at that point, coming from high school, I was told that I needed to go to law school. Well, I wanted to go to law school all along, but the idea of what you do when you go to law school and after you leave law school was never something that I had clarity about. So my understanding was that if I go to law school, then I would study, become a lawyer, go to court every day, help resolve whatever issues that people get to litigate in court. And my first time ever sitting in court was during my judicial attachment at the Mombasa Law Courts in 2012. And during this period, I realized that I actually, just for lack of better words, did not like being in court. And then, so at the end of the judicial attachment period, here we are looking at heading towards third year or end of second year towards third year. I started thinking around, like, what else am I good at? I tried an internship in a government institution, also realized that this is not something for me. But one thing that always stood out for me during my time at Kusol was that I loved international law. I loved having conversations about relations between countries, emerging cross-border. and transboundary issues. And whenever we had these conversations in class, I really enjoyed attending those classes compared to another class that you can think of. And therefore, that ignited my passion about international law. And that's how I ended up trying to pursue opportunities within this space, thanks to the mentors that I met along the way, starting with my first ever international law professor. That was Professor Daniels. He used to be at KU. Then we moved on to Dr. Msumba and a couple of other lecturers that we were blessed to have at Kenyatta University. This meant that I started networking and thinking beyond the space. I knew at that point that then I'm not going to court, I'm not going to be an everyday old school classical lawyer, but I will still probably be a lawyer in my own ways and on my own terms. And so this led me to starting looking for opportunities within the international space. And by the time we were graduating in 2014, I had already done a couple of things within the international law space and the international organization space. But notable at that time is that by the time we were graduating, I was working at the UN Environment Program. I was an intern at that time, working for the Governance Affairs Office. The inaugural body, that's the UN Environment Assembly, the equivalent of the General Assembly, because it has membership from all the countries in the world, had just been established around 2014 there as a governing council for the United Nations Environment Program. And therefore, all the new structures needed to be put in place, and lots of issues were moving around this place, around the international environmental governance space and the environmental financial space as well. And much of the work that we were doing at that time was in relation to just supporting countries and governments in their negotiations, either within the Environment Assembly or the Committee of Permanent Representative, which is just this smaller body within the Environment Assembly that's composed of all the ambassadors from all over the world, based in Nairobi or within the African region, or another ambassador that has credentials to negotiate and engage in conversations about environmental matters on behalf of their countries. I learned a lot from this period, grew my network, and managed to learn more about where I could be, because as an intern, that's using internships as opportunities to just calibrate yourself towards the direction that you want to pursue. And as Diana mentioned, just trying to find opportunities within the spaces that you engage in. If you see something, a conversation being had about a topic in a room, how do you carry that topic and turn it into a professional opportunity for yourself? So a couple of opportunities came up to engage in environmental governance, synergies, and cooperation between different environmental bodies across the world. And here we're talking about the treaties. Each treaty has its own governing body. So if you think of, for instance, the UNFCCC, the famous climate change treaty, it has its own UNFCCC secretariat as a governing body. And then it has the COP as the decision-making arm that gets to meet annually and engage in these conversations. That's one. But how do these treaties get to work together to achieve a common global objective, which is just environmental sustainability, sustainable development, and all these other objectives that are enshrined in different treaties, tackling pollution, both on land and the marine environment. And so around that time, we began a conversation about bringing all these bodies into one or two umbrellas. So one was creating the Rio Pavilion, which was established around 2010 there. This is a pavilion that brings together all the conventions that were established in Rio 1992. You have the UNFCCC, UN Desertification, UNCCD treaty, and the UN Treaty on Biological Diversity. So those three tend to work together. in terms of achieving the whole agenda or concerning the triple planetary crisis, which is climate change, loss of biological diversity, and pollution. But beyond, so that's how I got to be pulled into now the treaty section, which means that at the end of my internship, I transitioned from the Governance Affairs Office to the Legal Division and started working with the Multilateral Environmental Agreements Conventions program, providing research, advisory support service, research and advisory support services to countries, number one, as clients for these international organizations, and number two, the organization itself as to how to navigate different treaty issues as they come up within the United Nations treaty system, because issues are interconnected. We are no longer discovering the wheel. The wheel was many years ago invented, and what we're doing now is just trying to find different ways of making the wheel work more effectively, efficiently, and sustainably. And so that's what I did for about 4 years until I hit a ceiling in 2018. I felt like I needed to grow. I needed a new challenge. And I've always been someone who always tries to take on new opportunities and pursue new challenges just to grow and achieve my potential. I'm not yet where I want to be. I'm trying to get there. And so part of that step included leaving the UN and going back to school. At that time, it sounded like a crazy idea. Everybody, my parents, my siblings, even my mentors and colleagues were like, we've never heard of someone who leaves the United Nations to go back to school. You can leave and go to work in another organization bigger than us if there is, but going back to class and becoming a full-time student, okay. We don't know how this works, but we wish you the very best. So the year before, I had tested my ability to be a student by going back to the Kenya School of Law, because graduating in 2014 and getting into the working space means that I missed the opportunity to flow with my colleagues towards Kenya School of Law, but took up the challenge in 2017, tested myself, and of course, succeeded, got admitted to the bar the following year. And so I was confident that I could manage schoolwork, having been out of the game for quite a while there, taken a gap year, if I could call it that. And so I left the country, left Nairobi, moved to the UK, joined the University of Liverpool, master's 1 year. Out of that, there is a topic that I emerged a few years back during these spaces where I was attending meetings and conferences across the world, negotiating different issues with countries. One issue that stood out for me at that time was migration, not migration in the form of pursuit of opportunities or migration during conflicts, which is refugeeship, if we can call it, but migration in the context of environmental degradation. Why do people move when the environment has been polluted so much, or when climate change impacts both slow onset and sudden onset disasters impact them so much? Why do they choose to move? What's the driver behind all this? Because floods happening in places like Nairobi could push people to move to, let's say, from Kibera towards the city center, considering that might be a higher ground or something. Different factors. But my key question that I was never addressed in any of these rooms was whether international law is capable of offering any solutions. So going back to school and studying through my LLM, I decided to focus on this one question. What's the role of international law in addressing migration in the context of climate change and environmental degradation? It's a question that had emerged in the 1980s, was briefly mentioned in Rio 1992 and set as one of the objectives for sustainable development, but really was never addressed up to around 2007 there, when it again reemerges as a question during a conference, in a climate change conference, when a small island developing states asked would you wish for us to sink completely before you can decide on how to address this climate change problem? And so that question disappears again and reappears around 2015 when they're negotiating the Sustainable Development Goals at the UN General Assembly. And so it's one of those questions that intrigued me, like, what's this thing about appearance and disappearances in international law, just as a concept? When you think of something appearing once and disappearing and then reappearing after some years, what does this mean in the context of global development, global sustainability, human well-being, human rights, justice, both environmental, historical? What does it mean to businesses that are planning to do their things? What does it mean to emerging technologies? All these questions began flooding my head. So I pursued that topic as my LLM research, out of which the university randomly was like, hey, dude, this is an interesting topic. Can we make a PhD out of it? And I was like, yeah, when do I start? Oh, tomorrow. Okay, let's do this. I did that in a record time, managed to finish the PhD as the fastest ever kind of PhD done in that university. And by that time, I realized that Europe and the United Kingdom are not my spaces. And having done this topic, I realized that there is a major conversation happening in Washington, DC about climate migration development and how international development finance, so the money coming from the IMF, the International Finance Corporation, the World Bank Group generally, and other international development organizations and financial institutions. How can this money be used to address the climate change problem and therefore address or help communities build resilience or adapt to climate change impact so that they do not have to move, or if they move in an orderly, regulated manner? So I moved to Washington, DC, worked as for the Environmental Law Institute for a couple of months as a visiting scholar, researching on what they call just migration. This is a model that is being developed by mostly scholars, but it's a model that argues that migration and development and human needs can all be addressed within the context of human dignity as a basic core foundation of human freedom and human rights. Out of that, I moved to the World Bank, where I work for the Environmental and International Law Practice Group. This is, if you've interacted with the World Bank, it's divided into different practices. Within the practices, we have the League of Vice Presidency, which is basically the law firm, the in-house legal department, if you can call it that, or call it a law firm, in the most simplistic way, within the entire organization. So our work is to provide legal services, not only to internal departments, but also to countries. All member countries, when they're borrowing money from the World Bank for their development, there are certain requirements that are built into the finance, what we call the financing agreements or the project agreements or the grant agreements. And these requirements at this age and time have got to include certain international law obligations founded within the treaties, including the UN Charter, or certain environmental obligations or certain technological obligations, including AI, that we built into these contracts so that when a project such as construction of a dam in Kenya is being undertaken, it's undertaken in compliance with three things: national legal requirements within the Constitution, international or regional cooperation arrangements that are in place, international law obligations within the international treaties, and World Bank rules and directives and regulations, and also safeguards, what we call environmental and social safeguards. These are the minimum standards that are set by the World Bank within the environmental social framework. It's called an ESF if you Google it up, to set 10 basic standards as to how projects should be implemented so as to, number one, minimize impact on people and achieve the maximum possible development impact that is needed in this age and time of development. So just like Diana then, I've managed to pursue these different pathways of sniffing an opportunity within spaces that you would normally not imagine that a lawyer would fit in there. And that's what I would call within my space a new frontier in the international law and development space. Yeah, I think I should stop there and get the conversation moving.
Thank you very much. First of all, allow me to acknowledge, what do you mean when you say that it was the first PhD you have received, or at least that has been done within the institution? Just let me take you back there and acknowledge that particular accomplishment.
So basically, what happened is that having worked on this topic at my LLM level, I had done much of the groundwork. And when I joined the university, there were people who were already on their PhD program. And I started officially researching for my PhD in late 2019. And by 2022, I had submitted my thesis and then graduated in 2023. So usually it takes my financing was up to 2025. So I'm technically still a student at the institution. If I was to go back and say, oh, I still want to do another PhD, I would use half of the money that's left within the institution to do another PhD. But I just spent half the time that was needed, or less than half the time to complete it up.
Allow me just to say, as a fellow alumni of Kenyatta University, that is most commendable. If in another forum we would sing, oh, he's a jolly good fellow. Thank you very much for that. I love the story and how you've broken it down for us. Starting with Malindi. Did you say Malindi or Mombasa, where you did your... Mombasa. Being in court, being forced to wear a jacket when it's that hot, and determining that court is not my thing. And then segueing into the United Nations space. I love the boldness with which you determined I might want to go back to school rather than continue performing here. And then eventually to end up working in the law firm of the World Bank, which we did not know that the World Bank had a law firm. It's quite a trajectory, especially when you say you did not come into the legal profession with any preconceptions of what a lawyer ought to be. So I think it's a brilliant story. Now, your specific area is in development of environmental law, if I'm not wrong, and the dynamics involved, or rather the social economic dynamics affected by law in that territory. Let me just go back to a little bit of what Diana said. And it is very interesting because both of you ended up operating within a space that seems like it's governance, and a place where it seems like it's sociological and economic in background. None of us go to school expecting to end up at the World Bank. So tell me, what has been your interaction with specifically problem solving from a social economic perspective? And what is the kind of think through required for a person to engage with issues on that level?
That's a really good question, Johnston. Instead of giving a historical background to answer it, I will just cut straight to my current work. So the World Bank has a new president, and after his coming on, the World Bank embarked on this mission called an evolution roadmap, which brings all the three major World Bank group entities together to work as one, because the World Bank IBRD section works only with sovereign governments. Then we have IFC that works only with the private sector. Then we have MEGA, which only participates in the guarantee system. But when you bring them together, so they work as one, whereby you can develop one project that has a sovereign in it, then a private sector as an implementing entity, and MEGA as a guaranteeing subsidiary. But that's the complex aspect of it. What I'm trying to say is that this new evolution roadmap resulted in a new mission. The mandate for the World Bank has always been ending poverty, economic development in countries, and since 1992 coming up this way, the sustainable development aspect, which includes environmental, social, and economic sustainability, have fallen into this context of economic development. And therefore, the new mission for the World Bank is ending poverty on a livable planet. And when you mix these two things, you realize that poverty impacts the people. So that's a social as well as an economic issue. It fuels grievances within communities, causes conflicts because of resource competition, increase in crime. So that determines like issues like governance within countries, administration, constitutional implementation, and legal implementation of different laws within that space. And then when you go to so you asked a question about socioeconomic aspects of it. So the social aspect is that how poverty cuts down and works as a threat multiplier within communities, creating fragility. Some countries go into revolution, then you get to have illegitimate changes in regimes through coups and violence and all these civil unrest that emerge within countries when certain basic needs are not met for the people. So how do you address these problems? By giving people safety nets where they can land on in case of either disaster. Now let's talk of countries that fell into fragility because of an earthquake or a storm or something. This is where you bring in the environmental sustainability aspect as an economic issue. And therefore, our work mostly then entails guaranteeing environmental and social sustainability, or environmental and social growth, or environmental and social protection. You can use different concepts to explain these issues, but the end point is to guarantee that countries continue to grow based on their own agenda, because countries get to set their own development agendas. And the only role for the international community, be it the United Nations or the World Bank or the European Union or the Asian Investment and Infrastructure Bank, ends up becoming more of a facilitation role, whereby you help countries to move forward with the goals that they have for themselves and for their people. And these goals can be economic, social, environmental, in the context of the triple planetary crisis. Hope I've answered your question, sir.
Yeah, I think you've actually gone into quite a bit of what I'm beginning to feel is really the key element or the takeaway of this particular sitting of ours, which is to understand that, like you've just stated, really the law is well, they say art follows culture, as it were, and politics is downstream of culture. No, rather, culture follows the art, and then politics is a downstream of culture. And it, as it were, from what I'm hearing you say, is that what we are as the law is the guarantor of all these other factors. So we look into what they're doing, look into what they're experiencing, and then determine for them what is the best case scenario that would work for them, given the things that we seek to achieve. In your particular field, being sustainable development and a livable environment, I like that, the alleviation of poverty, but in a livable earth. And in Diana's case, it's a question of understanding all the dynamics that are at play within fintech and bring it. What we become is umpires of all the players within the field to ensure that there is a fair groundwork or playground for everyone to participate in. And I think it's a wonderful thing. Now, if you don't mind, I want to do a small question and answer session between you and Diana. Diana, if you're still there, please put your camera on. Is she there? Well, it was.
Sorry.
Thank you.
I was on mute. Sorry. Yes, my camera is on.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, it's a question I want to field to both of you. Walk me through the kind of mind shift you require to have for you to be able to operate within the legal field, but engaging with territories that are not, in essence, legal per se. There was no unit called fintech. I don't know if there is now. When in our 4 years of Kenyatta University, while there were units on international law, Daktari, like you've said, in the 80s they came up with a problem of immigration, migration on account of environmental degradation. But from the 80s until you came around, no one actually pursued the subject and extensively thought it through and determined what needs to be done. So migration is not something we learned in Kenyatta University, nor did we learn it in Kenya School of Law. At the same time, we never engaged, other than just migration, we never engaged with pollution of the environment per se. So what is the kind of mental mind shift that you require to do for you to be able to practice within an area of the law that is completely focused on a completely different field of practice? Perhaps we can start again, following protocol, ladies first.
That's the rule.
Those were the rules when we were in KU. Daktari, you confirm?
I confirm.
Asante sana. So if KU has changed, we need to go back to the time when we were chivalrous. So tafadhali, Diana.
Yeah. Chivalry is not dead.
Yes, indeed.
I think really, by the way, I like how, just to appreciate how Tom Keen has really elaborated on his experience from a going to court and then realizing court wasn't really working, and hey, there's something more that I can actually do, and not entirely quit law just because litigation is not working. And that's the kind of mindset, right? So the first question you need to ask yourself is, within the legal profession, because Johnston, I wouldn't say we are not in the legal profession per se. We are in the legal profession. We're just practicing law in a different way, which is practicing law within organizations, and organizations that are working within areas that we have interests in. So we are using our legal knowledge to support this organization. And even if I could actually even just look at it from a law firm perspective, right? Even if you're in a law firm, we have someone who practices all areas of law. So you're practicing conveyancing, you're practicing litigation, you're practicing commercial, all of that. But we've seen over time, lawyers that have been able to specialize in key areas. And again, I'll say key emerging areas, because you have to be at a place where you're able to identify opportunities. And as Tom Keen said, the only way you're able to identify opportunities is putting yourself in conversations that ordinarily your peers wouldn't find themselves in that conversation. Are you willing to have a financial, because I'm in the financial services space, are you willing to speak finance and look at finance from a legal perspective? Or are you just saying, this is what the Constitution provides, I can only speak on matters relating to the constitution. I'm just using that as an example, not alluding to constitutional law not being a lucrative area of law to practice in, but now being that I do not practice constitutional law directly. Of course, I may practice it. If I'm looking at Kenya, I will practice it indirectly because primarily all the laws must be in accordance with the constitution. What is my point? My point is the first level of mindset shift that you need to do is you have to stop looking at things as the only true test of a lawyer is going to court. Number two, you have to look at things internationally. We say the world is becoming a global village. So you have to look at your law firm if you want to practice law through litigation or through a law firm as opposed to working in organizations, right? And even sometimes later on in life, you can actually choose to establish a law firm that's focusing on specific areas. So those areas that are of interest to you, are there areas that can put you at an international level, or are you just looking at things from a local perspective? I'll give an example. Again, things that interest me. Speak fintech, speak digital currencies. I think we've had a conversation with Johnston for like 2 hours one evening, and we're just talking of how we are able to use technology to build people's businesses within certain areas within the community, right? But you can only think like that if you've been able to sit in conversations where people are thinking like that. So are you engaging in conversations that are moving you from a local lawyer to an international lawyer? Number two, even as you're doing and choosing your master's degree, and I think for me, this is like key. Are you choosing your master's degree because people go to University of Nairobi to do LLMs? Or are you actually going and drilling down to why exactly do I want to do this master's? Of what benefit will this degree bring to me in terms of knowledge and practice? Because unlike law school, KU, and law school where we knew you have to pass, you have to do all these units. When you're doing your master's degree, when you're doing your PhD, it gives you the opportunity to venture into other areas, right? Not necessarily doing an LLM. For me, I chose to do a Master's of Science in Finance and Law because I wanted to get into finance. But because I couldn't go back to law to undergrad and do finance, I chose to focus on law and finance so that I'm able to see the interrelation and interlink between law and finance. And in that way, I'm able to create a niche area of practice, right? So again, let the short courses that you do, let the masters that you do be in areas that are driving your interest. Don't do a course because people are doing LLMs or MBAs, or really ask yourself, what is the why? And again, as an individual, the things that interest you must be things of service. I keep saying this is actually out of the legal profession. It's just basic ways of growing it's like a primary rule for you to grow in your career, whether you're in law or whatever other area of practice in life you're in. You have to look at your life as a life of service. So are you looking at you becoming a big shot lawyer in a big law firm or in a big organization because you want to make lots of money? Or are you looking at how you're able to give back to the society? And those are the things that Tom Keen was talking about. How am I able to give back to the society through the legal knowledge and expertise that I have? I have established that the way I'm able to give back to the society is giving back to my organization, ensuring in setting up clear policies and procedures. I'm just using governance for this context. Creating proper governance structures then these governance structures help the business to grow. Then the business makes more money. The business is able to get into ESG programs, right? Like my company, for example, has an ESG program that focuses on girls and coding. But the success of that ESG program can only be if we have proper structures from the top down. And my role as the compliance officer, or as part of the compliance team, actually as part of the legal risk and compliance and governance team, is we are using policy as the way in which we dictate on how the organization survives now and in the future. That is what I call sustainability, right? So are you thinking outside the box? In this case, are you thinking outside the country? Are you looking at conveyancing, for example? How am I able to look at conveyancing issues outside of Kenya? Is there a way I can engage in the international conversation from these areas of conveyancing that I am really passionate about, right? Environment. Am I just looking at local, small NEMA issues? Or am I thinking, how does finance, law, and environment come into play? Again, I could love music. And I know some lawyers within the team, within Kusol, who are very passionate about art and music and culture. And how can I use my love and passion for art, music, and culture using my law degree to help make better that space for artists and all of that, locally and internationally? So what you're doing is you're identifying, as Johnston said, law is a tool. How are you able to use that tool to make lives better, not within the context of you can only practice law in a law firm or as an in-house lawyer, but you can practice law in any way, means, and form. You just have to find the way that suits you, the way that ticks you, and the way that helps you live in your full purpose. Right?
Oh, man,
so for me, that will be the thing I would say sets you apart.
Man, I think that is beautiful. I want to latch on one point that you made when you said, make sure that you're serving the people. It is in finding the place of need for the people and meeting that need that at the end of the day, you're able to properly engross yourself in something of value. It's not simply a question of paper chasing. We're not all trying to be grand mullah, you understand? And eventually get kicked out of the Supreme Court, just saying. But the idea is to first seek a place where you serve. I think you also mentioned, find your solutions not locally. They used to say only the person who, I think I'm paraphrasing and translating, only the person who's never eaten outside of his mother's house thinks his mother is the best cook, as it were. So stop looking locally, look internationally, and engage with the problems that are international in frame of mind. And then finally, accept that you will have to face other things. For instance, I'm sure some of you have come across accounting for lawyers. Those of you who have survived thus far, congratulations. Those of you who are struggling through, we, your seniors, struggled the same. But it is amazing that you went from the law into finance, even when most of us avoid accounting for lawyers. The courage and confidence to engage with a field that otherwise is uncommon to our profession, as it were, is critical. Daktari, let me hear from you. What do you think are the underlying conditions that mentally someone needs to make a shift in for them to be able to engage appropriately with the world and find themselves in a place of providing solutions for the world? Daktari, are you there?
That's a really good question. Yes, I'm here. Looking at it more broadly, when we enter into this legal profession, there are two faces. We have two faces of being a lawyer. Number one is being a law student, which gives you the education and understanding of the law and how it's either made and then operationalized by studying things like case laws. And out of that, you get to imagine what you could have probably done differently if you were a lawyer in a particular case. So you read a case law and you're like, maybe if I was a lawyer, I could have argued differently. That slowly begins to give you what we call your legal identity. And what the help of a legal identity is that it helps you to bridge the gap between education and implementation plus impact that Diana was pointing towards about service. How do you transition from somebody who has received the knowledge of what the law is or what the law can be, or whether law is law actually, and then translating that into something that can impact either a person, an organization, or the world at large? And this shift needs three things. It needs a vision, where you want to be, what you want to practice. The vision never changes. You always wanted to be a lawyer. So even if you end up being in-house, you're still a lawyer. If you end up working in a law firm, you're still a lawyer. If you become a judge, you're still a lawyer. If you end up in academia, you're still a lawyer. So we will have different then titles for them, like an advocate. We know that somebody who goes to, at least can practice in court, but an advocate was a lawyer first before becoming an advocate. So being a lawyer is at the bottom basic foundation of addressing legal issues and challenges in different contexts of the society, and that moves you from vision to mission. The mission is like, what's this thing that you want to address? What's this thing that you want to engage in? Or what are these different issues that, for lack of a better word, that turn you on and make you want to dance within this legal career space? And then out of this mission, you build your own identity. Are you a Grand Mula? Are you Okiya Umtata? Are you Diana Igati? Are you Johnston Daniel? And when people mention the name Johnston Daniel, what comes to your mind first? Oh, that guy, that DJ guy, or that eloquent guy who does legal oratory, because the biggest tool for a lawyer is speaking. How do you communicate? How do you tell a story? Either in writing or in verbally in court. And so that's how you develop your identity. And then the identity gives you the niche so that you can create impact, keep learning, keep doing. And this aspect of identity can emerge in 4 ways. And for me, it emerged through, as I mentioned earlier, classwork, education, and all these curriculum requirements. Something along the way clicked for me that this can be my vision, my mission. And then internships and all these opportunities, how you select those ones and how you build out of them also has a strong influence on your mindset, which for me was interning in a law court, interning in a government agency, and then interning in an international organization. And out of these three, deciding, and also working in academia, out of these three, deciding that this is something that can be my calling or my mission and my identity. Mentorship, which is actually a key thing that every lawyer needs to know. At my age, I could define mentorship as not only a mind-shifting tool that everyone needs, but also an opportunity to stand on the shoulders of the giants. How do you identify this one person who's done something that really inspires you and makes you think that someday I want to be that person? If you go back into the Stone Age, there was no education, there were no notice, there was no apprentice. But the way the Stone Age people learned things is by observing and working alongside what we would call the master. If they were developing tools using stones, cracking stones against each other, children used to spend time around, sitting as close as possible to the elders so that they can observe, how do you sharpen a weapon using a stone? And out of this observation, a skill is built in the mind of a child in that generation. And then out of this mind of a child, an ambition is born. And out of this ambition is an opportunity to kill the master so that you can become the master yourself. I'm not saying go commit a crime and kill the master, but the idea of killing the master comes from this notion that once you rise, once you learn from somebody, you do, but aim to do better than them. And then the last bit of mind shifting space where you can find your mind shift is just understanding contemporary changes and challenges that are emerging across the world. Every day, each aspect of what you see on Twitter is an opportunity to shift your mind. Everything you see on Instagram is an opportunity to shift your mind. Everything you see on Facebook, every meme that somebody sends you is an opportunity to shift your mind and steer your career in a different direction. For instance, earlier this week, the International Court of Justice delivered a decision in South Africa versus Israel. As much as we understand that this is a Palestine-Israel conflict and different ideas or issues emanated from that ruling, there is the issue of as a country suing another country because of actions of that country in another country. Can you be a lawyer who participates in that thing? Not only, I'm not saying go sue Israel, but I'm saying, can you help address a problem in Somalia by litigating it in Nairobi? Yes, you can. How do you do that? You begin by understanding the challenges affecting communities beyond your own local space. And then you try to engage with them within your everyday life. If you work in a law firm, you try to think, okay, we handle corporate issues, and there is a corporate problem probably relating to a fisheries conflict in the Somalia waters between a Chinese ship and a South African fishing company or processing company. How do we engage in this space? Then you think of, if you work in an environmental focused law firm, you go things like, okay, climate change has been a problem for ages. What are some of the opportunities emanating within this space? We have climate finance for finance people like Diana. We have carbon markets for people who want to participate in this credit or selling of certain shares or something within the space or within the finance space, which is not my thing. I just do carbon finance contracts. I've never engaged in a carbon finance transaction. So that's where Diana comes in, for instance. And this is something that's actually emerging within the Kenyan space, because currently I think there is a bill before the Kenyan Parliament to amend the 2016 Climate Change Act and introduce things to do with carbon finance, carbon markets, nature-based solutions to climate change. These are business opportunities for lawyers, because if you read the Global Biodiversity Framework that was adopted in 2022, you will begin to understand all these 20 targets as to how countries develop their own nationally, what we call nationally determined biodiversity conservation goals. Within that space, there are layers as to how things like forestry governance, fishing, agricultural practices can become an opportunity for a lawyer, not only within the local space, but within the international space. We have things to do with environmental justice or climate litigation. And one of our classmates from Lamu is called Swale Al-Said. He's quite active in that space. You get to see him go to COPs, like COP28 for climate change, and engaging in these conversations with other youth leaders from across the world. But he does this both as a social activist, but also as a lawyer, and combining these two things. What's the problem that he realized was impacting Lamu, and how did he magnify that into a career that he has built for himself? So this space is my idea of mind shift then will be understanding that the law evolves, number one. Law is not something that remains static across generations. It evolves. What was the definition of mens rea in 1900 in the criminal law space is not the definition of mens rea in 2023. So how do you evolve with the law in that regard? And in the international law space, the way we get to explain this idea of the evolution of the law is by looking at the transition from when we did not have countries through the Versailles Treaty, all the way through colonialization to introduction of statehood, and then saying, oh, there is a state. How do you determine a state? Recognition and all these things. And then moving on to international cooperation. Then we move to international managerialism, which emerges in the 90s. This is where we begin to see what we call international law expertise. Before that, we had international lawyers who could do anything international law. But in the 90s, we begin to get these things called international law expertise, where people get to focus on a niche area of international law from the 90s, be it climate change, warfare based on the situations in the Cold War period, of course, and developments after the prosecutions of World War II. And then you get to see people focusing on things like human rights, seriously becoming like a career thing, and moving on to technology also, because in the 90s is when like technology starts booming, but it's not until 2020 when technology starts again going through the entire, what we've traditionally understood as fragmentation. So now within, Diana would say within the technology space, we have big tech, we have finance, we have technology for climate change, we have technology for biodiversity conservation, both on land and in marine resources. We have the whole thing of what types of technologies, what we call harmful technology, in either within the national spaces where governments get to decide that this technology cannot be used in our country. How do you work on that? I like the idea Diana mentioned earlier about thinking of things like conveyancing beyond your own national space. For instance, when you look at the environmental social framework of the World Bank, which is like the environmental and social constitution of the World Bank, it's a new tool, was adopted in 2016, came into force in 2018. And before that, we had the safeguards, which were like old school, but now it's very new. It's divided into 10 standards. Standard number 5, what we call ESS 5, talks about land resettlement, involuntary resettlement, land compensation. These are conveyancing questions, land acquisition, and these are issues that governments must focus on when they're borrowing money, for instance, from the World Bank to build a road. If you're trying to build a road through Githurai, how do you address the social and environmental issues emanating within that space? And so these are opportunities for lawyers practicing within Nairobi or the international space to have that mind shift and begin to think of land not only as a national issue, but also an international law issue, as a human rights issue, as a historical injustice issue, as a climate change issue, as a security issue. And all these other issues that you can think. You take one topic and then apply different lenses to it. If you like finance, how can you practice finance within the land space? And I'm not talking about finance within the land space as a question of conveyancing so that you get your fee. No. What are some of the other financial transactional opportunities, be it fintech, be it something that can operate within land as a concept, but also as a tool and a resource? I could go on and on, but I think let me stop here. And I hope I've made some sense.
Oh, I think you made a lot of sense. First of all, let me just start by saying, yeah, kill your masters, as it were, which is to say, the place for mentorship is critical. It is important that you have people who, because what a mentor does, from what I've heard you say, is be able to see, to conceive for you things that you might not be able to see on account of their experience. So get a mentor. The other thing you said is, do not be, you must engage in the conversation, engage through getting the internship, engage by putting yourself in an environment where you can learn. And I like the way you said you tried to be in court, that didn't work for you. You tried a government institution, that didn't work for you. And then you settled in this international non-governmental organizational space. So it is critical, therefore, from what I've heard, is to actually have the engagement. Then the last thing I think that is critical, you have stated, is when we were kids, we used to figure out how where the wind was blowing. You'd put your finger on your tongue, and with just a little bit of saliva, put it out in the yes, and the wind would blow, and you would know from which direction it was blowing. So always have your mind on what the contemporary issues are, and being able to reflect as to, given the contemporary issues as they present themselves, what are the consequences of certain directions if they were to be taken, and what can you provide in terms of policy, legislation, and even, well, like in the case of South Africa going to court on behalf of the Palestinians, in terms even of litigation, what can you do to push the issue to move the needle, as it were? So I think, and I was just trying to capture some of the things that you've stated, and I think they are very valid contributions. Now, that being said, Daktari, I feel like you've gone into and you've given us a mini dissertation, as it were, of the new emerging areas within your field. I don't think I've afforded Diana a similar opportunity, just in case there are people within the audience whose main focus is to hear, given your fields, what are the main things that are emerging, as it were, that could become our main focus. So I want to give that opportunity to Diana. We'll spend about 5 minutes in that. Diana telling us these are the new things that people could look into to get an edge. And then we will open the floor for all the KUSA members, as it were. We used to call ourselves comrades. I don't know what you're calling yourselves these days. We'll give an opportunity for 2 questions on the platform, and then I will read out the questions that have been made, that have been written on the platform, and then we'll come to a close. So Diana, if you're there, please.
Yes, so for not just for my sector, but just also looking at things broadly, I would say the key emerging issues are, number one, we have data privacy and data protection. And I know, of course, Kenya has implemented the Data Protection Act. But we are thinking internationally. You have to be in a space where you also take time to understand the data protection and data privacy laws outside of Kenya, familiarize with the GDPR, which is the UK data protection regulations. You familiarize yourself with Europe. Why? Because they've been able to establish really good policies about around data protection and data privacy. And most of the countries actually locally, within Africa and also internationally, and even Australia right now is actually trying to play catch up in terms of implementing rules and guidelines around data protection in line with what the GDPR has done for the UK. Why is it important that you look at data protection from that perspective? We are having, again, a lot of direct foreign investments coming from the Western world into Africa, right? So if these investments are moving into Africa, you have to be in a position where if these organizations come to Africa and they want to seek to partner with law firms, they want to partner with law firms that understand the international landscape. And when you talk of these direct foreign investments, of course, these direct foreign investments will focus on tech-related platforms. So most of these tech-related platforms are agri-tech platforms, fintech platforms, insurance tech related and tech related platforms. Anything that is being enabled by tech. Remember, the whole essence of technology is to make life easier. And one of the key things that's affecting technology platforms is how do we collect, process, and secure data, our users' data, right? So are you able to be the person on the ground that's able to advise these international organizations on how they're able to collect, process, and use data in Kenya for their clientele in Kenya, and maybe those organizations that seek to also operate outside of Kenya move into the rest of Africa, but primarily centered, headquartered in Kenya, for example. What are the implications from a data privacy and data protection perspective for clients coming from those other jurisdictions? Again, we are thinking internationally. Number two is the environmental, social, and governance issues, which we refer to as ESG, and Tom Keen has really delved into that. And again, you don't have to practice ESG as a whole. You could actually practice ESG and focus on key areas. For example, Tom Keen made a lot of emphasis on the environmental aspect of things. I love the social and governance aspect of things because from a social perspective, for me as a person within the financial services space, we have, again, a lot of foreign direct investments coming into Africa. And conversations are now changing from organizations being profitable to how are these organizations also contributing to environmental, social, and governance issues, right? For example, how are these organizations treating their employees? How are organizations collecting, controlling, and processing users' data, right? How are, again, if I could use the environmental aspect of it, if this company is involved in recycling, is the recycling a good thing to the environment or a bad thing to the environment? And again, I'm not in the environment space. I could have used the wrong example. Tom Keen can correct me on that. When you look at the governance issues, we are no longer just ticking boxes. We have to be at a place where we're looking at governance from how is the structure of the board promoting diversity. And right now, we are moving from just diversity when it comes to age and gender and color. We're looking at diversity from a broader perspective, and we have to appreciate the things that are happening worldwide. So are you able to understand diversity from that international level perspective? And how are you able to apply that within the local perspective? Because you want to have your client, whether you're acting as an external counsel or in-house counsel or in-counsel, are you able to position your organization from an environmental, social, and governance aspect as an organization that stands out? And even if there's profitability, that we can also show a very good trend when it comes to ESG matters. Even when we talk of G, again, the governance issues, do we have policies and procedures that are fit for purpose? Or do you call your colleague, ask for a policy, control, all, delete, replace, or whatever it is, and you have your name? Are you building internal policies and procedures that are fit for purpose? So getting to understand how you're able to use the law to build the E, the S, and the G within the organization helps you create a relationship with internal stakeholders if you're in-house counsel, and also your stakeholders who is the company if you're external counsel. The other thing that I think we should really also see as a new frontier is AI. And again, the EU recently is actually working on an AI laws and regulations. Australia is also working on AI laws and regulations. And key questions always go back to the issue of, how is it affecting copyright laws? How is it affecting data protection laws, right? So how are we using also AI to ensure that, for example, for me within the financial space, one of my key things will be, how is AI likely to promote consumer protection or breach consumer protection? So again, I want you to see that these are not foreign things to us. It's just that it's advanced level of thinking that we also have to advance our levels of thinking as lawyers to make sure that we are at par. So that even we are in our contribution to policy, when Parliament releases a law, we are able to say, hey, we're not just copying and pasting what the EU is doing. What the EU is doing, but we are actually building policies that are fit for purpose for Africa and for an African country. Another area that I feel we should is a new frontier. Again, I'll be very biased. It's within the financial services space, is financial crime. And when we think of crime, we think of the penal code. But ask yourself, why is it so important that all these corruption laws, we have government agencies like the EACC, government agencies like the Financial Crime Center, government agencies like the intelligence unit within the CID, all these intelligence units. Why is it so important that they ask you where your money, why do you go to the bank and they're asking you where your money is coming from, right? All those are financial crime related issues. And again, just going back to your clients, because again, direct foreign investments, a lot of money is coming into Africa, questions will be asked. And these questions will be asked in terms of, are you able or do you have proper governance to ensure that your business is not exposed to money laundering, cyber crime, cyber security issues, and terrorism financing? That's fin crime, which is a very good, and it's a frontier not just affecting financial crime, financial services sector, because even if you're in the NGO world, the questions will still come. Where is the money coming from? Is this NGO being used for proliferation of funds obtained through criminal activities? So if you do not understand that, then it becomes very difficult for you to also offer guidance to the directors of the entity, of the NGO, entity. And again, the other opportunity would be, there are so many opportunities to learn. There's so many opportunities to learn, because even when you're thinking of AI, even just going back to the law firm perspective, how do we look at AI technology and smart contracts? I have colleagues who have specialized in smart contracts. They don't do anything else. They look at procurement and smart contracts. Google and see what smart contracts are, because that's part of the whole us having this session today. So we're not saying that law firms are not a new frontier. We're just saying you need to identify things that stand out. You need to identify and even ask yourself, how does the legal landscape look like in the next 4 years? How will, in fact, is looking at the law in 4 dimensions. How does the law look like in the next 4 years? And how are you able to tap into those opportunities as a lawyer, as an advocate of the High Court of Kenya, and place yourself in that space to be the person that stands out? And when we talk of standing out, we don't mean that everybody is behind you and you're the one. You're able to get into a place where you are able to properly, you really understand the subject matter, and you're able to think not just from a legal perspective, but also from a business perspective, also from a social perspective, also from a economic perspective, also from a governance perspective, and where necessary, even from an environmental perspective, becoming all rounded. And if you can, in-house also offers those opportunities, because you learn the business as you're applying the law. So in-house or external counsel, all these opportunities are available for you. Once you identify and run with it, you're able to offer that to your clients, whether they are corporate clients or individual clients.
Thank you very much. I once sat in an economics class, and they looked at all the resources that we have, whether it's capital, labor, and the like. And it came to the fore that to create maximum utility, to optimize utility, that the one thing that changes is technology. So it is in finding your space, in understanding, one, what technological change has happened, two, how that technological change can be regulated, because primarily our role is regulation and dispute resolution as advocates. That's what I'm hearing you say. Because the only thing that transforms society is technological advancement, then your role as a student of the law, as it were, right now, is to try and figure out what is the new area in which technology has created for us to operate in, whatever the form of technology, whether it is legislation with regards to the environment, or it is technology in terms of fintech and AI, to afford us our and therefore the question becomes, what is our responsibility as practitioners of the law to provide leadership in regulation and dispute resolution within these new areas that technology has created. I think that has been a wonderful session. I want to just say, to commend both of you for the great work that you're up to, and just providing us this opportunity to engage. I have two questions that have been put up on the platform. And the first one is really to both of you. It's written to Daktari Tom Keen, but I will put it to both of you. Now that the two of you don't go to court, for what purpose did you attend Kenya School of Law? and what is the utility of that attendance? Just a short snippet from both of you about Kenya School of Law, becoming an advocate of the High Court, and its utility, given that both of you are operating in the international environment.
Diana, you go
Thank
first.
Okay. Okay. For me, of course, Kenya School of Law is important, and you also need to appreciate your country and how the systems work within Kenya, right? If you're, let's say, in the US, and maybe Tom Keen can explain, there are countries where law is a second degree, right? So you're able to use law and banking as a degree, or law and something else as a degree. But for us, law being a sole, like an actual single path that you need to follow, or you can follow in terms of your undergrad and moving forward, you have to go to Kenya School of Law. Because I will say maybe Tom Keen was lucky and that he was able to get a job before he joined Kenya School of Law. But I can tell you, not many have the opportunity of not going to law school first and being able to practice law for the rest of their lives. Most people who leave it at law school, at undergrad, end up doing other things other than practice of law, right? So if you really want to practice law long term, and because you have to start somewhere, for me, I recommend 150%, please go to Kenya School of Law. And if you can, go immediately after you've malized your undergrad, because your blood is still hot, and you still are in contact with your colleagues from KU or wherever. So that makes it easier for you to even transition, because again, it's just transitioning the studying, and you're still young, you don't have a lot of things zenye zinawasumbua. Then you can figure out the rest later. So the fact that every place you will ever go, even in-house, they will always ask, do you have Kenya School of Law? Do you have 2 years postgraduate? That in itself means that you have to do Kenya School of Law. So for me, recommend 100%, if you can, go to Kenya School of Law.
Thank you very much. Daktari, your word?
Just to echo Diana, there is nothing as a useless skill or qualification. Every qualification matters along the way. And I've learned this later on, super laters. As I keep growing and becoming a fossil is when I begin to look back and realize some of the small things that are more important to life than the general belief that we can do without certain things. I'm a closet liberal at best and a romantic at worst. What do I mean by this? I like playing with ideas and romanticizing them into something that invokes and kind of renews my thinking or my emotions or my desires. So if it's about the law, I like romanticizing with the law as something that is capable of resolving so many problems, even when sometimes I deep down know that this is not a legal problem. But I like the idea of just toying around with it to the extent that I get to think, is something really necessary or not? So for me, back in 2014, when we were graduating on 17th December 2014, when we wore those gowns in KU Square, everybody was like, I'm going to Kenya School of Law in January, because that's when people join Kenya School of Law. And I'm like, man, I really don't know if that's necessary or not. But later on, I came to realize that that's something that I should have done as soon as possible, as Diana pointed. It's something that I should have gotten out of the way, because the effort that you need to put into passing a by exam is somehow approximately correlational to the amount of responsibilities you have around you. So if you are a parent, you will need double effort to pass the Kenya School of Law exam compared to someone who's fresh out of KU or another university and going straight to Kenya School of Law. The concepts are still fresh in the mind. They've not been saturated by other demands of life. So that said, I think Kenya School of Law is really, really important. And on top of that is the idea that having even cross-jurisdictional qualifications is important. Find out what it takes to be admitted to a bar in Tanzania, for instance, or in Uganda, or in Sudan, and pursue that. So having bar qualification and the qualification to practice law within one jurisdiction or more is really, really important in the context of, and I say this from experience, having seen different opportunities either slip my finger because I didn't have a certain qualification, or getting to realize that I could have handled something better if I had a certain skill. And that skill is probably only developed at the Kenya School of Law. So I just in agreeing with Diana, I think Kenya School of Law is really important. Go there as soon as you can, get done with it, and move on to pursue other things. And if you get the opportunity to qualify to practice in another jurisdiction, go for it. Because in every organization currently, if you take your computer right now and search jobs at the World Bank or jobs at the IMF or jobs at the European Union, African Union, most of these legal jobs that are emerging have got one of the requirements that you will see there is qualification to practice law in at least one jurisdiction.
Thank you very much. So there's no escape in Kenya School of Law. I don't know if they still have entry exams. I know they had tried to introduce that back in the day. But yes, the sooner you can be done with them, the better. Now, perhaps Daktari, both of you, Diana and Daktari, went a step ahead and did your LLMs and your PhDs. A very interesting question has been asked, and I will be closing on this question because of time. Where can you find scholarship opportunities for those of us who have hit the 35 mark, 35 years of living mark? Because it seems that most scholarship opportunities are for people who are younger. I'm guessing that the reasoning is that if you can run for president in this country at 35 per the old constitution, then you are able to run your own activities and pay your own school fees. So perhaps any direction you can give us with regard to scholarships for persons over the age of 35, and maybe you can speak generally to the question of scholarships.
Diana?
I did not get a scholarship, unfortunately. I I got 3 admissions to unis, but did not get scholarships. So I think Tom Keen is best placed to discuss, to share more on scholarships.
Much obliged, Your Honor.
So to think around the question of scholarship is the opportunity to get your education funded by somebody else so as to save you the financial struggles that most of us have faced or can face when pursuing our education. And within that space, traditionally, education used to be a full-time thing. And so when you thought of scholarship, is that money that finances your full education all through, but that has changed. We have online learning, we have in-person, we have cross-university where you are admitted, let's say, to Harvard, but your degree is taught at Cambridge, and one of the modules within your degree is taught in another university. So there are different structural underpinnings to scholarships, but to generally answer the question to 35s and above and 35s and below, number one is, it starts from a personal level. And as I said, vision, mission, and identity are really important things when you package yourself and put yourself out there. Because most scholarship will require you to be very unique in your thinking and in your pursuits for them to grant you that opportunity that here's the money, now go study, because what you're trying to study is important to us. Of course, there are scholarships that are general. They just put it out as a competition and then get to interview different people and pick the best. Or there are some that are just too general that if your application is picked first, then you are the one who gets it. So there is no magical way to getting a scholarship, but packaging yourself is the only magical way that I know, and being strategic as to what you're pursuing. For instance, the current scholarships that only focuses on AI, fintech, some of these new opportunities that Diana was mentioning, and they're not in Europe. They're probably in China or South Korea or Vietnam, because you have to find which region or which university is most interested in a topic that you want to study and what opportunities do they give. Some it's like 50%, some will give you like 20%. Then you will need to apply for other internally founded scholarship opportunities. But the question was, where do you find these opportunities? So back to the beginning. Number one, online. I think Twitter is the best place to start from these days when you are searching for anything. There is nothing you cannot find on that platform. X. That's what we call it now. So if you go to X right now and type LLM scholarship at the search top there, it will bring you a lot of people either commenting on where these opportunities exist. For instance, I found my LLM scholarship, I found it on Facebook in a comment section within a post that somebody else had made celebrating their achievement, and then somebody commented within the comment section about this opportunity that exists in this law firm somewhere in Europe that's trying to focus on these issues. So my scholarship was funded by a law firm, and that's how I got to learn about it, through a comment section on Facebook. So I believe social media is a strong tool. This is where you can engage actually in conversations, directly responding to somebody's post and initiating these things to happen. Number one is Google. Number two is Google search. And this one, you have to be strategic as to how you play with the search tool, search terms and tools and such. And number three will be networking and mentorship opportunities, because people get to know these things based on, it's who you know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody. It's a very important slogan to work with in life. So those three might be the key areas that I can pinpoint out as to how. But the bottom line goes to be strategic and be ambitious and be ruthless in your pursuits.
Thank you very much, Daktari. Allow me just to honor our guests and say thank you very much for the opportunity and having taken the time to speak to us as it is. I want to recognize all alumni members of Kenyatta University, and also perhaps any current students of Kenyatta University here. And want to say thank you for having been here. My name is Johnston Daniel Jr. I'm practicing right here in Nairobi. I'm asking if Chairman, Mr. Murunga, if you're there.
Thank you, Johnston. Thank you so
much.
much. Thank you, members. I want to thank the panelists, Diana and Tom Keen, for, first of all, for Diana staying too late in the night to participate in this webinar. Thank you so much for your time and for the presentation. I've listened keenly, and together with Tom Keen, I'm sure that we have benefited. Tom Keen, I also want to thank you, and thank you on short notice. You did not say no. You agreed to be a co-panelist, and I must say thank you so much for that presentation. Also to thank our host, Johnston Daniel. You've seen he's improvised his location. He's out somewhere. So thank you so much for ensuring that you're able to proceed with the moderation of the session. On behalf of the Kusol Alumni, I really want to give our share our gratitude for the presentation and for your time. And I hope that you will still honor our invitation in the near future if we do reach out to you. Lastly, I want to thank the members, those who have logged in. I know it's working hours for those who are in Kenya and those who are here. But thank you so much for joining in. I hope that you have benefited. We are going to have our next webinar on the 16th of February. So I look forward to a great discussion. So thank you so much, members. Thank you to the Kusol Alumni Association, those who are here, the officials. I've seen Emma, and I think I saw Wangila also. So thank you so much. And please remember to support the Alumni Association. Please subscribe, please register, be a member, make those contributions just to ensure that we remain afloat, to share and to keep interacting. Thank you so much. We are free to leave until next time. Be blessed.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Tom Keen.